When people say it's um it's okay to be alone, you should be okay with being alone. Even the way that that is phrased, it's okay, which really just basically says it's not okay, which is like, yeah, it's okay, I guess. I know that's all you can get, is being alone, then you have to make the best of it. And so what I want to do in just a little bit of time here that we have, I want to talk about this idea of how to not how to be happy being single, but how to reframe. And I think reframe in a way that is truthful and honest. Reframe your thinking about being alone and also being in a romantic relationship. So I think one thing to think about right off the bat, and by the way, I'm not saying this because the goal is to make people feel better being alone. Like, there are lots of things in life, there are lots of situations in life where I don't think you're supposed to feel good. There are times in life where I think that it is entirely inappropriate to feel bad or to feel like you're not where you're supposed to be or to feel like, I fucked this up or damn, this is not a good situation or whatever, right? So, like case in point, if we were talking about Marilyn Manson, I don't think that anyone should say with a straight face, "Oh, well, he should feel great about where he's at." I mean, you're still famous, you still got a little bit of money in the bank or whatever. It's better than me. Yeah, yeah, but at the same time, come on, come on. There are very real reasons for him to be upset. So that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to make people feel better about being lonely or about being alone or being single. What I'm trying to say, though, is that I really don't think, spiritually, metaphysically, I don't think that time spent alone or time spent single is this waste that people feel it is. I don't think it is purgatory. I don't think you're just like when you're single, you're just waiting in purgatory until heaven comes, until that person comes. And so I really think that people need to be disabused of this notion that our culture and our society and lots of poems and movies and songs and all kinds of things have given us that if you aren't in a relationship, if you haven't started down the marriage kids track or whatever, then you're just in purgatory or you're doing something that is somehow less deep or less important or less existentially significant than if you were married and having kids or on some great love affair. All right, so these are some things I want to say to people who are single, whether you're single because you've never really been in a committed relationship or long-term relationship, or you have and you got divorced and now you're single, or whatever your situation is. First of all, I think one thing to remember is that one day, if and when you do get into a committed relationship or you do get married or what have you, you're going to miss this time when you're single. And you might say, what? I don't mean that in a superficial sense, like you're going to miss when you got, oh, I got to fuck a lot of people back then, I can't now, or whatever. I mean, that may be true for some people. um, but no, I mean that there are actually very real positives and benefits and dare I say enjoyable aspects to being single and or to being alone. Um, And if you don't perceive that, if you don't feel that, if you're the type of person that can't find ways to interest yourself in life or to feel like you're living an interesting or significant or meaningful life, then that might be a sign that you need to try to find more things. And I don't mean things, but like interest, passions, commitments, whatever, ways to pass the time, but things that you can really get engaged in that maybe you need to find those things. And I'm not saying that like having a hobby or having a career or doing philanthropy or having friends is the exact same thing as having a boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Like, yeah, I get it. There are things that are in some ways more exciting qualitatively or, passionate or whatever about that experience than about these others. But what I'm trying to say is that there's really a lot when you get into a relationship, there's really a lot that you do give up, I think, in terms of developmentally and just sort of like in the interior dialectic conversation that you're having with yourself every day. Let me explain what I mean by that. I, for the first 30 years of my life. Um, well, okay, after I went to college, let me say. So for all of my 20s and into several years of my 30s, I lived alone. And sometimes I was in a relationship, sometimes I wasn't, but those relationships, most of them happened to be long distance. So most of that time I was living alone, and I did go through a long stretch where I was single. And do you know one of the things that in hindsight I wish that I would have appreciated about that time and that I miss now that I'm living with someone and I'm in a relationship is that when you are living alone, you have a much more heightened interior dialogue going on within yourself. And I'm talking about the when you go through a day and you're thinking about things, or you're talking within yourself about things, or it might be, you're communing with God or whatever. But when we are alone, there is a sense of a kind of a dichotomy that's created within us, and a dichotomy in the sense of like I'm talking to myself, I'm thinking to myself, I'm you your relationship when you're alone, your relationship with yourself becomes deeper. And that's one of the tenets of, meditation. I'm not big into Eastern stuff, and honestly, when I try to meditate and when I try to do like formal meditation, I can't do it because I like overthink it, and then I'm like, okay, I'm just like, okay, I'm trying not to think, clear my brain. Oh my God, I can't clear my brain. I can't clear my so like I actually don't have patience for all of that formal meditation and everything. But the thinking behind it is that when you get quiet, and when other people get quiet, and when you get away from other people, and when you turn inward, then there is a whole other kind of understanding with oneself that one is able to access. And I just remember that all those years when I was alone, living alone, I remember that it seems like I got into a much deeper sort of conversation with myself and also with God. I'm not talking about actually audibly or hearing voices or whatever, you know what I mean? But like there was something that I don't have anymore, because now the dialectic is not as much within myself, it's with this other person because he's always here. Yeah, I mean, unless one of us goes somewhere. But like when you're living with somebody, it's not long distance or whatever, or someone who's really important in your life and is there, the dialectic becomes with that person. And you do lose something in the interior. If the attention, if your attention and your sort of dialectic becomes centered on someone else, then it's decentered from within yourself, or it's decentered from God, honestly. Why do you think it is that the tradition of like monasteries and the tradition of silence and of spiritual meditation and all of that, why do you think it's so emphasized in so many religious and spiritual perspectives? It's because it heightens that silence, and that aloneness heightens the relationship with God. Or chance on me, are you still talking to me? Who are you talking to? Oh man, I'm not going to block you because I don't care. I don't even want to take the time to know how to do it. But anyway, none of these comments, by the way, are going to. I'm really just talking right now to put this on a YouTube video. So none of these comments are going to matter anyway because they're not going to be visible when I record it for the YouTube video. So you could just write fuck nonstop and it wouldn't matter. Um, So that's one thing. I'm serious. That's not some like consolation prize, like, oh, when, well, you're alone, at least you got yourself, this will give you more time to think about yourself or to meditate. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I found it, the years when I spent, when I was alone, I found that there was actually a real sort of psychological, spiritual, even intellectual depth to that. I thought a lot more deeply about things. I did because I had a lot more space to. And so I would go down like rabbit holes in my mind that now I have to set aside some time when I shut the door. And even then he's like coming in to check on me sometimes, right? And those of you who have kids, I don't know how the fuck you ever get time like to be alone or to think, I mean, to think within yourself at all, because it's just constant, right? So anyway, and here's another thing I think people need to think about. I understand that being in a relationship feels good. Like I'm just on a biochemical level, falling in love, it is a high. It is definitely a high. And of course, that heady the heady honeymoon period. I was thinking about honeymoon and then honeymooning in Europe. Okay, heady European period. No, the heady, the heady honeymoon period. Where the hormones are just pumping and you can't keep your hands off each other and whatever. Like that subsides, and that doesn't mean that all romance or all passion goes away or whatever. It really doesn't. I've been in a relationship for years now, and it doesn't mean that. But I'm just saying, like that fairy tale feeling and that chemical high that people love so much, and that so many of you who are single or who are alone are just pining for, and you feel like you can't be complete when when you don't have that feeling. Just understand that when you find your person, you're going to lose that feeling anyway. Again, I'm not saying like when you're together for a while, like there's no sex, there's no romance. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that feeling that so many of these twin flames people are yearning for, that they're obsessed with and whatever on the internet and I'm just saying, I mean, even Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly now have to go to marital therapy, right? We know this, right? They were papped after their big fight, going to the counselor's office, the marriage therapist's office for 2 hours. And so eventually that feeling has to wear off. It does. It goes away, and it usually goes away within 1 to 2 years. And so I guess what I'm saying is it would be good for people to remember when they're feeling so lonely or when they're yearning for a great romance. It would be good for them to remember that once it arrives, it's going to go. So like basically you're putting everything on hold for like 1 to 2 years of feeling that won't last. Again, I'm not trying to be like cynical, like romance is stupid or whatever. I'm just trying to counterbalance this, it seems like overly romanticized view of relationships that a lot of people have. And also, let me just say, the time that you spend single, even if it turns out to be your whole life, the time that you spend single, it is not existentially, metaphysically, whatever, it's philosophically, it's not a waste of time, because you only have so many hours in a day, you only have so much, brain power to expend in a day. And just like I was saying earlier, when I was alone, I thought about a whole lot more things in certain ways or whatever, right? You only have so much time or attention or energy to expend. And so if you're not throwing all of that into a relationship, then it has other places to go. I mean, look, y'all, isn't it a cliche that when people get serious girlfriends and boyfriends, what suffers? Their relationships with other people. It's almost inevitable. Like, yeah, I know there's some of you who are like, no, I still got my girlfriends, I still got my boys, but come on, do you really lean on them as much when you've got your man or your woman? Do you really call them as much? Do you really text them as much? Are you really as hooked in with what's going on in their lives? Maybe so, maybe some of you, but the general trend is that the more locked in a person gets into their one person or their one family, then the more that there's a kind of a detachment in other ways. Now, I know for men it's a little bit different because apparently in a lot of relationships, women help to sort of strengthen the family ties and stuff with like extended family and everything. Okay, again, yeah, there are positives. There are positives to being in a relationship and there are negatives. But I'm just saying, instead of looking at the time that you're spending single as this wasted purgatory, you're waiting for your life to start, you really should see that I don't really see any reason why a life single is any spiritually or metaphysically or intellectually or whatever your barometers. I don't see where it's better, where it's superior. It's different. It's a different allocation of attention and resources and whatever. And I would just say, as someone who does believe in God and does have some amorphous, nebulous, spiritual beliefs, if our purpose in life, if everyone's purpose on this planet and in this life was to pair up with their soulmate or their twin flame or whatever, then everyone would be doing it. Everyone would be doing it. But since everyone's not doing it, and since it seems like there are a hell of a lot of people who aren't doing it, or who marry someone and then it turns out to be the wrong person or whatever, or who end their lives, at the end of their lives, they're single. Since there are a hell of a lot of people that don't have that experience or are single, then you know what? Maybe our purpose is more complex or deeper or interesting than just this idea of like pairing up and going through life or even having kids. I mean, why not be open to that? Another thing that I would say is that honestly, romantic love I don't think is really when if we could just for a moment separate ourselves from that chemical feeling that we get when we're in love. If we could just see that for what it is, a hormonally induced chemical reaction, then I think we could see that there really isn't anything necessarily special about romantic love as opposed to other types of love. Yes, I know that the nature of romantic feelings is that it causes us to pair, to join with someone in an emotionally deeper and more committed way. So in other words, that physical attraction or that psychosexual attraction, that romantic connection, it starts this chain reaction then that gets someone very focused in on this one person, and that focus then causes them to make a commitment or to have children, and then that sets them on the road to even deeper commitment, and then they spend more time together and they get married and they have kids, and that it grows into like a whole like sort of network of different meanings and commitments and stuff. Yes, that is true. But again, I go back to my earlier point. If that were not the case, then someone would be then growing in other directions and other networks of experience and feelings and so forth. And I just don't think that we have the perspective from our limited human perspectives and frankly our hormonally controlled perspectives. I just don't think we have the perspective to determine which path of life is superior or which kind of existence is superior. None of them, to my knowledge, almost none of the major religions, world religions, prioritize romantic relationships. I mean, I think about the verse in the New Testament where Paul says it's better not to get married. Yeah, go ahead and do it if you feel like you're going to sin. Meaning, if you got to fuck, then yeah, or whatever. He didn't say that exactly. But no, he said it's better not to marry. Then you can be more committed to the Lord's work or whatever. But those who are weak or those who feel that they must so that they don't sin, those who need that kind of sexual or romantic outlet, then go ahead and do it. And of course, yes, I know there's lots of verses in the Bible that celebrate a good wife and, and so forth. But I'm just saying that, like, I don't think that it is necessary or even necessarily preferable to be in one kind of relationship versus another for our spiritual development. Laurence Olivier, the famous 20th century actor, and he could certainly be an asshole in a lot of ways in his personal life, but he definitely had a great love affair and a long-lasting marriage with Vivien Leigh, the Gone with the Wind actress, until she went really like crazy with extreme bipolar disorder, had to be institutionalized and stuff, and they ended up divorcing, and she found someone else and whatever. But my point is, Laurence Olivier was quoted once as saying that all of the romance, all of the balcony window effusive proclamations, and all of the notes and the roses and the chocolates and all of the beautiful poetry and all of that is nature's cold, calculated way of getting you to procreate. And I do not believe that it is, no, it's not correct to take all of the years of marriage, or of long relationships that people spend together and where they get to know each other very well and they get each other through illnesses and difficult times and all of that. No, I don't think it's all reducible just to procreating. But he's kind of right. He's kind of right. And while all of those things that I just mentioned are really important life experiences that happen in committed relationships, also, y'all, haven't you ever thought about how kind of weird it is and frankly superficial that really all of that gets started by physical attraction that's utterly meaningless? I understand that it can grow into deeper things, but lots of things can grow into deeper things. But like, I understand that, but it's like, really it is this hormonal chemical reaction that's meant to just keep the biology going, to keep the species going. And so I guess what I'm saying is not that we should stop writing poetry or not that we should stop having these deep feelings, and and meaningful experiences with our spouses or our children, but also I think sometimes we would do well to take a step back and to be a little more clinical and a little more objective about the fact that we are primitive animals. We are just, from an evolutionary perspective, we are just out of the caves, out of the cage too. No, but we're just out of the caves. And like, when I look at cats, like, well, I've actually never seen cats mating in person. I've been spared that sight. But I have on YouTube once or twice seen videos with cats mating. And like when I look at that, do I look at that and I say, wow, that's such a soulful experience. Wow, look at the spiritual depth of that encounter they're having there, those cats. No, I'm like, it's two animals mating, and I don't think it has some great spiritual depth or meaning. And so I guess what I'm saying is like, I think if we could step back a bit from our very brief and honestly, in the greater scheme of things, existentially insignificant lives, I think that we would see that a lot of the things that we overdetermine with significance and meaning, and oh, I've just got to do that, or if I won't do that, then it means my life is meaningless, and I've got to do this, and it's really just like those cats fucking out there. You fuck, you don't fuck. You have a litter, you don't have a litter, you live for a little while, you get run over by a car. That's our experience too. Honestly, that's how I see it. And that doesn't mean, again, that doesn't mean that that's the only way of looking at it. It doesn't. But I'm just saying that I think sometimes we are so focused on this idea that we're so different from the animals, and we're so detached from nature, and we're living on some kind of a high plane, that when a lot of people actually don't reach that, or they don't achieve that, or they're not in some like sort of like amazing romantic relationship, that's just fulfilling them in all these ways or whatever, or their person hasn't come, or they haven't started procreating, that they're just like missing this thing that they should have. I think there's another way of looking at it. There's multiple ways of looking at it. You know, the philosopher Heidegger, German philosopher, wrote this really big book called Being in Time. And it's not something that I've even been able to get through. It's one of those things that like a lot of professors, like philosophy professors, what have you, say they've read, but like a lot of them haven't even read it because it's so huge and it's difficult to get through. But Heidegger, he had a lot of interesting ideas, and he was really interested in the significance that death can have for our perspective on life, and the idea that thinking about your death can be in a way liberating to the individual. And there's a part in his book where he talks about the fact that we would do well to remember that we come into this world alone and we die alone, and that it doesn't matter ultimately if you have a spouse or you don't, or you have kids or you don't. He doesn't say this, I'm adding this, but it doesn't matter if you have a spouse or kids or you don't. No one can go through the death process with you. And so his thinking was this, that if we give more attention to the fact that birth and death are both ultimately absolutely individualized processes. We come into this world alone, we go out of this world alone, that it can help us to see that ultimately the nature, the existential and deeper, more significant aspect of our lives, dimension of our lives, it is an individual one. And that since we, at the end of our lives, since we are going to basically have to account for our lives, either to ourselves, on our deathbed, or to God, or whatever, if you believe that we should then live our lives we should take ownership, not only take ownership of our lives individually, and not just give up our narrative to other people, to how other people say it should be done, or to what everyone else says we should want, but that also we should not entirely give up ourselves even to the relationships around us, that we should always keep a part of ourselves still separate, and we should respect the individual nature and significance of our life. And I guess so the point that I'm trying to make here is that I feel like sometimes another reason why um, people can't believe or can't really accept that it's okay to be alone or that there's value in the time that you spend alone is because so many people want to believe in this fantasy that when they get to the end of their lives that they're not going to have to face it alone if they're in deep relationships or if they've got their kids there or if they've got their spouse there. And you might say, well, you're making too much out of this death thing. But no, seriously, do you know what I hear more often than not when people say things like, I don't want to get married. I mean, I've said it before. I don't want to get married, or I'm not sure I want to be in a relationship, or I don't know, I don't see myself being in a relationship all my life, or I don't see myself having kids. I get this response sometimes from people when I say I don't have kids, I don't want to have kids. They'll say, what do you think they say? Most common response to stuff like that. You don't want to die alone, do you? Or I don't want to die alone. I just don't want to die alone. I just hope that one day I can get married or I can find someone or I can have I gotta have I just don't want to die alone. And look, that's not like a silly thing to be afraid of because death is fucking scary. Even if you believe that you're going to a better place or a different place or what have you, death is fucking scary. And so I almost think sometimes that our overemphasis on long-term lasting forever commitment or even the feeling that people have that they absolutely they have to go into old age with kids is this fantasy that if we can just have someone there, then it's not going to be scary, or they're going to be there with us at the end. And that just never happens. You're always alone. Even if you got all your family around you at the end, I'm telling you, those of you who have seen it, you know it is a lonely, lonely experience when someone enters the terminal zone. And you see it with illnesses. I saw it happen to someone close to me who died of cancer. There comes a certain point, and it might be, weeks, it could be longer than that, it could be days, but there's like a terminal zone that they enter where they are untouchable. They are cut off. They are in their own experience of whatever's going on. And a lot of people, they're so doped up at the end that I mean, understandably so, right? But they're so doped up at the end that they're just in and out of consciousness or sedated. It often, death doesn't look like it does often in the movies, where like in the movies they'll be totally conscious and they get to have their last words or their last meaningful connection with the person who's with them. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get that, but most of the time, people are unconscious or largely unconscious for the last period. But my point is not to bring everybody down with death, but just to say, like, we have a lot invested in we tend to put a lot of weight or a great deal of investment in our notions of romantic relationships and even of children. And I think it's good sometimes, again, to step back and to ask ourselves how much of that is reality and how much of that is just sort of things that we've all bought into that might not be actually like the most accurate ideas. And of course, yes, it's easier to face illness and it's easier to face difficult dark years if you have someone in it with you who's like truly is a help and so forth. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, oh, it's just meaningless to have your family or your children with you. Then I'm not saying that. But again, I'm trying to give another perspective here to people. I would also say that I find a lot of people who, how do I want to put this? I find a lot of people who believe in God's plan and spirituality, or who have a more defined view of God than I do. Like, I know a number of people, and you probably do as well, who are not only religious or spiritual, but they think that they totally have it. Yeah, Alan Watts. Yeah, Alan Watts is. We should talk about him sometime. He's one of the ones who has interesting things to say. What was I going to say? Sorry, I just saw the Alan Watts thing there, and I thought that was cool. Oh yeah, so there are a lot of people who have very actually highly defined ideas, notions of God, and like they think that they have a personal relationship with God. I'm not saying they don't, but they think they have a personal relationship with God. They think that God has a plan for their lives and all of this stuff. And yet, it seems like there are some people who, when it comes to when they see that they haven't met their person yet, or they're lonely, or they're single, or whatever, then they have this feeling that, well, this is outside of the plan. Right? I've got to find that person. I've got to get into a relationship. I've got to have kids because this is the plan. And yet, and I always kind of get confused with people like that. And I'm not talking about you in the audience necessarily, but I've seen people in my own life. I've known a number of people who are religious and who talk about God this and God that and God told me this and God told me that. And yet these same people get so anxious about finding the right person, or why haven't I found the right person, or I've got to get on like 10 different dating apps and online and all this stuff because I've got to find the right person. And I want to say to them, if you have so much faith in God that you're talking about him or it all the time, or you're going to church every Sunday or temple or whatever, you've got all this faith in God, and yet where is your faith about this period of life you're going through, about your singleness, or about God's ability to bring you the right person if and when it's time? The disparity for me between people's professed spiritual beliefs and their professed a sense of assurance that what they believe is right and that they've got this line to God or whatever, the disparity between that and the anxiety, the profound anxiety that a lot of them seem to feel about their lives and the state of their lives, it doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense to me people who are atheists, or people who have, more like I do, nebulous ideas about spirituality. I don't totally know what I think or whatever. It makes more sense for us to be anxious, about, well, maybe there is no plan, or maybe I'm never going to find the person, or whatever, right? We're just stuck out on a rock here. We don't know what's going on. But like people there are a lot of people that I know who have very highly defined theologies, and they feel that they have this like highly attuned connection to God, and I just don't see, though, in their lives at times the things that they get anxious about. Where is that faith then? And so I think for some people, it's like, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, or whatever. But if you really believe those things, then you're within God's plan. God either has a plan or he doesn't. I mean, I just, so that's one thing, it's people are, I don't think it's healthy to have so many people out there who really seem to believe that until they find their person and have kids, then they're just in this sort of like awful, like meaningless waiting period. And that's what I see with these twin flames people, that they are feeding into that, they're capitalizing on that, and people are so desperate that they'll latch onto it. All right, I'm getting to the end here. A few more things I want to say. I think that there are a couple of other anxieties that are going on here with people, with like the twin flames people who are into this, and just people who are really anxious about relationships and about being single and all of that, or whatever, or not being able to have kids. I think that one thing, speaking of kids, I think that one thing that's going on with some people, particularly women who feel very desperate, is that there is a very real biological clock that is ticking. Now, if you're a wealthy woman, or even a woman of decent means, there are now things that you can do to extend your biological clock. And I'm not saying people need to do them. I'm just making a comment as an aside that we are entering a new phase in our evolution, seriously, as human beings and as women, where we are not going to be bound by the same kinds of biological restrictions much longer on fertility. Yes, eventually people will still get too old, to procreate with their own stuff, so to speak. But like we're basically at the point now, and it'll become more. It'll actually, I think, be put into practice in the upcoming years, where you can just basically grow babies in labs, and like they're even working on exterior, mechanical artificial wombs and things like that. So like. And we see it even now with very wealthy women. How the hell do you think these movie stars are suddenly having babies at 49 and 50 and whatever? Naomi Campbell, she's like in her early 50s. She had one. James Bond's wife, Rachel Weisz, she had one when she was like 48, 49. You're seeing lots more wealthy women now having kids in their 40s and stuff, and there's things like surrogates and this and that. And again, you might be out there saying, well, okay, but I don't have the money for all that shit. I'm not going to freeze my eggs. I'm not going to go to a lab. I'm not going to do this or that. So this is pointless for me. I understand, but I'm just saying, like, just as an aside, we are about to move into a new phase of evolution where we're not going to be constrained, or we're not going to have the narrow time frame that we've got right now biologically with the biological clock. But anyway, but for most people, we're still not there yet. So there is a very real biological clock. And I certainly have had a number of friends who have had their first kids without any kind of medical intervention in their late 30s. And even my best friend just had her first kid when she was 40 or 41. No intervention, nothing like that. It just happened. Yes, generally speaking, as we understand, the prime time, though, for women's fertility, it's in their 20s and early 30s. And the general idea is that if you haven't had your first child by the age of 35, then as we know, it gets more difficult and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we may not agree on what the exact time frame is. I realize different people have different ideas, but we understand that basically, you got like a 20-year period as a woman. And we understand that it's not good, generally speaking, for women to get married or to start families when they are still, high school, college age, and so forth. So for most people, we're looking at a time frame of like what, early 20s, maybe even mid 20s to mid to late 30s. Okay, so yeah, I get that. Like, that is pressure. That is pressure to know that you've got this, 15 or 20-year window, depending on your philosophy. If you want to have kids and you don't have means to extend it, you've got this window and you got to get it done. And to get that done, most people want to do that, not by themselves, but in a relationship with someone, man or woman, whatever. And most people want to do that in a committed relationship, right? So like, it starts to get more complicated. I totally get that. And even though I'm not someone who has ever wanted to have kids, I certainly have had a number of female friends in my life and people that I was close to and so forth who very much wanted to have kids, and their clock was ticking, and they kept having breakups or not being able to find the right guy, and they're getting well into their 30s and they're feeling desperate. And I have known a couple of women personally who got married, I think, to men that they didn't really love or that they had to talk themselves into, and that they ended up having bad marriages with because they so wanted children and they felt like their time was up. And you know what? I can't say that that's always an incorrect calculation. If you look at, there's a certain extent to which you have to be honest with yourself about what you really want. And if you are someone who absolutely you have to have kids, and you're yearning for them, and you really think your time is up, and this is just something that absolutely you've got to do, or you want to do, or it's the biggest top priority for you in your life, then you know what? You may need to settle. You may need to settle. Like, I mean, you may. I don't think it's not advice that I would generally give, and it's very sad for me to have seen women in my life settle because they wanted to have kids and then find themselves stuck in shitty relationships, and they have to end up getting divorced, which is hard for them and hard for the kids and all of this. Like, that's sad to see, and to me that doesn't seem right either. But also, I recognize that in life we can't have everything that we want. We can't have everything we want. And so if you're up against a wall and your top priority is having kids, then maybe for some people it's right to settle. I would say, though, I think there's a number of people who just refuse to entertain the fact that maybe having kids is absolutely not existentially essential for a successful or meaningful life, whatever your definition of that is. And I wonder how many people there are who got married, who got into a relationship or got knocked up in a bad relationship or whatever because they felt like their time was up and they really had to have kids. I wonder if they had not done that, honestly, like, would their life have been less meaningful? I don't know. I don't know. But I just think it's interesting how so many people default to the view that, like, if you haven't had kids, then, like, or if I haven't had kids or whatever, not me personally, but I'm speaking as you, right? Like, if I don't have kids, then, like, I might as well just not have lived, or I failed, or I missed out on the best experience that you can have. I just don't know that that's correct thinking. And so to someone who is in a situation where they feel like their time is up, and they need to settle in some way so they can have a kid, like, I would just say, you know, make sure that you're sure about that. And also, I know that there are people who say, well, you don't need someone else to have a kid and you can just have it on your own. And I don't even want to get into that whole can of worms. I'm far from an expert on anything, right? So, but but I do understand that. I do understand that perspective. I just where I start to question things too is again this notion that that everybody who doesn't have a kid, is going to have a meaningless life, or a life that misses the mark. I don't know. Just like I was talking about earlier, the idea that all of these aspects of romance that we write about in poetry and that we think of as being this sort of like high points of our existence, that this idea that those are really just nature's way of getting us to procreate. Like, I think the thing with kids too is that people can sometimes over romanticize children or having children. And like some people say that the most noble or the highest form of love on this earth is the love that a parent has for a child. But that love is hardwired into us in a way that makes it impossible for us to really know the truth about the nature of that relationship, because it is so in nature's interest and it is so in our evolutionary interest as a species for parents to feel that way, for people to feel that way about procreating, because look, otherwise, if we didn't feel that way, if people didn't feel that way, then it's a hell of a lot of work and it's a hell of a lot of sacrifice, and it can be very complicating, and it takes away a lot of your freedom, and it really significantly, significantly reduces for several decades, at least, a couple of decades, the energy and attention that you can give to other things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, nature's got to have a pretty big inducement for us to do something that would put us in that kind of a position. So it's got to make us have a really strong sex drive so that a lot of people will, first of all, get pregnant by accident, which is still how a lot of pregnancies happen, right? Here we are talking about, planning when you're going to have a kid or waiting for the right one. A lot of people are just going to fucking have get pregnant, right? And I'm not even saying I mean, who knows if that's even in a larger existential sense, if that's a bad idea. I mean, nature clearly wants us to be fucking and producing. But I'm just saying that I'm just saying that nature makes these drives very strong in us, these drives for sex, for romance, and also it can give us these almost sort of, I don't want to say delusional, but these sort of overhyped feelings about things to induce us to do what it wants. And so again, I'm just saying that I think sometimes in life, often in life, it's good to remember that you're an animal so that you can kind of observe your behavior from that perspective, understanding that there's more going on maybe than you within yourself than you really understand. And I think often we overly romanticize, or we overly emphasize or over determine things in our mind, like, I must have children, I must have this dream wedding, I must do this or this. And I think sometimes it's good to say to yourself, well, must I actually do those things? And where are these feelings coming from that I have about these things? I'm not saying they're coming from a bad place. I'm not saying that it's just everything's just shit or whatever. But again, there are values to different perspectives in life. So, and the last thing I want to say, here's the last thing I want to talk about. There's another anxiety that, one more thing too. I have noticed, y'all, that with all of the hand wringing that people do about finding someone and getting in a relationship and, oh, I'm so lonely, and, oh, when is it going to happen for me or whatever, I would say that I have observed that like 90 something percent of the time, all of those people in my life who are hand wringing about being lonely, it's been so long and I'm never going to find the right person. I just had to break up with like the 50th awful guy that I've dated and whatever. Those people still end up finding the right person or a good person or whatever, and they still end up, getting married if they want. They still end up having kids. Like honestly, I don't know if it's God or what it is, but there does seem to be a way in which the universe does seem to sort of lead us into the path that we are wanting to eventually go. Not always and whatever, right? But, and I know there's a lot of horrible things that happen to people, and I'm not trying to say God wanted all of it to happen, but I am saying that there is also something to the idea that in life, if we would just calm down and take a breath and just let things proceed, then they will. And the other thing that you need to understand too is that your life, it can change in the blink of an eye. And I've known a hell of a lot of people who have, if you look at them at a certain period in life, a certain snapshot, a moment in their lives, they're desperately lonely. They've been through all of these shitty relationships. They've given up hope on ever finding someone decent. I'm not going to have kids. It's not going to happen for me. All my friends have already gotten married. Nah, 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 nah. And then guess what? 6 months later, they're in love. They're going to get married. They're going to have kids. I mean, it's happened to multiple friends of mine. And it didn't happen for them until they were in their late 30s and like this one early 40s. Now, again, I know biologically it's not the norm or whatever, but I am a spiritual person, and I do think that if we try to live lives of meaning and also and of spirituality and of rationality as well, but if we try to live lives of self-awareness and lives of intentionality, that is living our life with intention, but also with intentionality towards the times when we're lonely and when we are alone, and not just intentionalities towards some future date when we find the right person and we can have a child, then I think things do end up proceeding as they should. But that's just me. But there's one more thing I want to say. There's one more anxiety that I think is fueling this twin flame stuff, and I want to address it. I think there are a lot of people who are single, want to be in a relationship, and who feel a great deal of anxiety as to how hard they should be working on getting someone. Because here's the thing, y'all. Evolutionarily speaking, if we look back at human history up to this modern period, there were really not many ways to meet someone. There weren't. You lived in a small community, unless you lived in a big city, but even with that, you had your community. But before technology, we lived in small communities where, basically everyone kind of knew each other, and you would basically be restricted in your dating options or your marrying options or your childbearing options. You would be restricted to like a small group of prospects. And so there wasn't this, I'm not saying that people didn't feel angst about finding the right person. I mean, just read Madame Bovary, right? And I'm not saying that there wasn't this angst about, am I settling? Should I settle? Should I not? Should I, et cetera, et cetera? Should I be out there mingling a little more, what have you? But I'm just saying that you didn't have, traditionally speaking, for almost all of human history, you did not have the technological capacity to put yourself out there in so many ways in the dating world. It was just like, okay, here's me in my small little community, my small little village, or my small little town, or my neighborhood, with no way to contact people in other parts of the continent or the world or what have you. And I don't have too many prospects, and so, we'll see how it goes. And most people ended up finding someone. I'm not saying it always worked out great, but that's how it happened. Now, today, and so there was not much pressure on human beings to have to work at finding someone, at finding a mate or a spouse or whatever. There wasn't. But now, because we have such widespread and multifaceted technological ability in terms of all of these platforms, and I'm not just talking, as you know, about the dating platforms and the hookup apps and whatever. I'm talking about just even, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, like all the ways that people meet people. And then you can go online and you can find places to meet people live. We're going to go to this meetup or this or that. And it's all, and just the fact that people can have long distance relationships now that can be held together through technology, whereas in the past, the best they could do was write letters that would take a long time to get there. It has put a tremendous amount of pressure on people to feel like they need to be doing everything they can to find their person, because after all, finding someone is the key to life. Or so we're told, right? Again, I've been trying to counteract that idea, but so we're told. And so when I look at these twin flames people who are so obsessed with this idea, or people even worse who get in groups like this, particularly this crazy group that's featured on Netflix, and they spend all of this money to take these classes about how to make themselves more attractive to their twin flame, and how to prepare for their twin flame, and how to locate their twin flame, and what to do if their twin flame doesn't like them, etc., etc. All of this angst and all of this anxiety and this pressure and this stress, what I want to say to them is, like, you're not, I just don't think you're supposed to be feeling that. And you're not evolutionarily designed or evolved to feel that. That is not a pressure you should be putting on yourself. And so I just want to say to those of you who are single and who feel this pressure, I just do not think that you have to make a full-time job or even a part-time job out of dating or out of trying to find someone to date. I really don't. And I know, yes, of course, people have met people on dating apps and on dating sites and stuff and social media that they fall in love with and married, and I think that's fine. But I'm still finding, that for the most part, when I observe people around me and how they end up getting together, even if it does take place on technology, there's usually a kind of an organic nature to it, or a way things just kind of fall into place, or what have you. And so I just don't think that the kind of stress that people feel, that there's this person out there for them, and if they don't work hard enough, it's almost like that old Calvinist work ethic. If they don't work hard enough, God's not going to give them their person, or they're not going to get their person, or that person, is going to pass by. Like one of those movies where two people are destined to be together and they almost meet and then something happens, or like The Remains of the Day, if you've ever seen that old movie with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. It's really a beautiful movie, but like at the end, they both have these feelings for each other, but they just can't, things just don't quite come together where it works out, and he's looking at her and she's pulling away, she's on the bus, she's on the tram, and it's going away, and they're just looking at it like, we almost had it, we just tried a little harder. I just don't think that that's how it's supposed to be. And so I'm not saying that if you're lonely and if you want to find someone, that you shouldn't be using dating apps, or you shouldn't be making overtures toward people. I mean, in a lot of cases, I think people would do well to profess their feelings more often, or earlier, or whatever, right? I mean, really, what do you have to lose? But I also just think that this kind of stress, where this has become, because of all these dating apps and all these outlets and everything, where people think that it's like it has to be like a job and a stressful, constant, everyday strain. Oh, I've got to check my inbox, because what if Mr. Right sent me a message on Match.com, and I didn't see it? Because I just didn't feel like checking my email that day, and my entire destiny is derailed. I'm gonna die alone. Anyway, I don't know what all that's worth, but I appreciate you being here, and good luck to us all. Whatever our paths in life are, may we all find our twin flames, or not. All right. Bye, everybody.